الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We begin by first off extending our condolences to our 12th Imam al-Hujjah and to the brothers and sisters who are here this evening as we've gathered to commemorate the day of the martyrdom of the commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And we ask Allah to accept this act of worship from us in this month of Ramadan. And we ask Allah that we are able to benefit from the shafa'at of Amir al-Mu'mineen on the Day of Judgment. And that we are all given the tawfiq to make the ziyarat of Amir al-Mu'mineen in his home city of Najaf for the fulfillment of all of our desires, for the alleviation of difficulties around the world, and for the curing of all of those in our communities who are sick by the Shafa'at of Amir al-Mu'mineen. One loud salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. 2 nights ago when we gathered on the 19th of the month of Ramadan to mark the night where Amir al-Mu'mineen was fatally wounded in Masjid al-Kufa during the morning prayers, we began a topic about community building in the light of the teachings of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And we mentioned on that night that as we are within the time of our 12th Imam al-Hujjah, that we owe it to ourselves and to our Imam to study what a true community which is in a state of waiting would look like. And because we are in these nights where we commemorate the death of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we wanted to take inspiration from the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Because when you look at the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, when we look at the 12 Imams, we realize that really it was only Amir al-Mu'mineen who had an opportunity to govern, a true government. You know, the other Imams, we know what happened to them. Maybe 8th Imam was given a very superficial, governorship. But Amir al-Mu'mineen was really the only of the 12 Imams. Obviously, our 12th Imam is an exception to this rule. But from the first 11 Imams, only Amir al-Mu'mineen had this opportunity to govern and lead. Although, as we mentioned, that it was a 4-year, just a little under 5-year khilafat, this caliphate that he had. And he was forced to fight 3 major battles within that short time frame. But still, the groundwork and the framework that he laid down is something for us to have to think about, to reflect upon, to see where do we fall within the ideals of Amir al-Mu'mineen's system of governance. As a very brief preamble, I just want to summarize what we talked about in our previous discussion. We talked about the fact that one of the reasons, if not the prime reason why we are gathered tonight wearing black, why we're marking the shahadat of Amir al-Mu'mineen, is nothing other than the fact that he was a strong proponent of human justice, of rights, of equality for humanity. And I say humanity because, we tend to keep Imam Ali limited to the 4 walls of our center. Yes, he was the Imam for the Shias. He was an Imam that was appointed by Allah directly. He didn't need public opinion for him to become the Imam. He was given this designation by Allah. But he was an Imam for humanity. Just look at the depth of profundity of Imam Ali. When he sends Malik al-Ashtar to Egypt, he tells Malik, you're going to a country that has been led by many kinds of people before you. And realize that when you go to Egypt, and today if you look at Egypt, it is also a very multicultural society. He told Malik, realize that people will be of two types, either your brothers in Islam or your equals in humanity. There were Jewish people there would have been Christian people in Egypt. And Imam Ali said, deal with all of them at the level of humanity at least. So his level of justice was not just about Muslim justice, it was about Christians, about Jewish people. He treated them with respect. In fact, even in Medina, he used to work for a Jewish person in their farms. So he had interaction, and he realized that all of humanity had to be treated with respect. And so we looked at that aspect, that this is really why he faced death in the mihrab. He wasn't killed because he prayed too much. He wasn't killed because he could finish the Quran in 3 days. He wasn't killed because he went for Hajj or gave khums or any of these acts. It was the sheer justice this man wanted to show, that people could not bear with justice. And it's out of my scope for the discussion, but if you want to study what was happening before Imam Ali's Khilafat, look at the levels of nepotism that were there before him. The Khulafa that came before him, this is no hidden secret. This is open knowledge in all the Muslims' history textbooks. There were theft from the Ahlul Bayt. Fadak was stolen. There were no repercussions. People didn't go to jail. Men were killed and their wives were raped by the companions. Nobody went to jail for it. Nepotism was such that the Prophet had banished people from Medina. People were kicked out of the city by Rasulullah, and the Khulafa brought them back into the city. And they appointed them to be governors and heads of state. And so with all of this nepotism and anarchy and corruption, now you have a man like Ali alayhi salam who comes on the scene and he wants to rule with justice. People couldn't handle that because, how do you deal with justice when you've led a life of openness where you can do whatever you want to do and the governor would never be upset at you, right? And so he was killed, as we mentioned that quotation from a non-Muslim, that Ali was killed because of his intense desire to implement justice in society. This is all it was justice. And so we talked about the fact that as Amir al-Mu'mineen, one of the key things that he looked for and that we have to strive for is unity within the communities. Even when he spoke to the Khawarij, the same Khawarij who would later on kill him, the ones he had to fight in battle, he was all about uniting the forces. He said, you have ideological differences, keep them to yourself. For the betterment of the Muslim community, let's not discuss ideology. He was about unity, about uniting the Muslim Ummah. Even those that were strong against his leadership and his Khilafat, he wanted them to come into the fold of the Jama'at, of the community of that time. We also talked about the fact that when you look at the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen and his ways of governorship and leadership, he divided humanity into two groups, the leaders and the followers, for lack of a better word. But he said that you have to have two groups who are in sync with one another. Leaders have to be there, and the followers also have to be there, and they have to work together. We talked about the fact that there are rights and responsibilities on both sides. Leaders have rights and they have responsibilities, and the people who are being led, they have their own rights and they have responsibilities as well. When we closed the discussion, I gave an example. I just want to further elaborate on that for a few minutes before I go into the theme for tonight. I spoke about a letter in Nahjul Balagha, I believe it's letter number 45, which Amir al-Mu'mineen penned to his ambassador, his governor in Basra, Uthman ibn Hunayf. Uthman ibn Hunayf was appointed by Amir al-Mu'mineen to be the governor of Basra. And in that letter that Imam Ali wrote to him, he had a very sharp tone with Uthman. What happened? Why was Imam Ali upset with him? He was upset because Uthman took the invitation to go to the rich and elite people of Basra's homes, and he engaged in dinner with these people, where they had, in my terminology, a massive buffet of food. Imam Ali talks about various plates and bowls of different colored food, and plates full of meat, and all the luxuries that maybe the commoners could not eat. Now, one of the things I want to mention, because 2 nights ago we spoke about taqwa, about the shared trait between a leader and the followers. Why would Imam Ali reprimand his governor for going to people's homes and having good food? It wasn't haram. Keep this in mind. It's not haram what Uthman did. To go to somebody's home for dinner is not a problem. He wasn't looking at it from that level. But what I want to just clarify, and because I didn't give the full description in the last session, is that when it comes to taqwa, this God consciousness, our responsibility to Allah, taqwa will depend on who you are in society. So the common people, the masses, are expected to have one level of taqwa, whereas the leadership are expected to exemplify a greater level. It's not hypocritical. It's that because the people look towards the leadership, when they look towards them, they say, well, if the leader is not living a life like me, how can they understand my problems, right? And we gave the examples of Imam Ali's life where he was the governor, he was the Khalifa, the Imam, and the Caliph of society, who had probably trillions in his assets of the government treasury. But his level of taqwa meant that when he ate bread so hard he had to break it on his knee to eat that bread. His taqwa meant that he had to live at the level of the lowest people in society, at the lowest level of people, at the lowest economic strata. Right? This is how we understand taqwa, that as you go up the ladder in social ranking and responsibility, your taqwa also has to be more, because now you are a representative of the religion. And so when Uthman was reprimanded, he didn't do a sin. Eating food with the elite was not a problem. But Imam Ali says, I don't expect you, when you represent me, and the poor people are barely having enough to fill, one day, that you can spend that kind of time and eat all of those, various kinds of food, and think that you are a representative of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And so the lesson I want to draw from that as I continue for tonight is that taqwa, which is an ingredient for all of us, everybody here has to have some level of taqwa. But the more and more we become, we can say, involved in the society, involved in our communities, we take higher positions within a society, the more and the more our taqwa has to be displayed. And we see this from even our contemporary Maraja. You look at many of our grand Maraja Taqleed in the world today, who literally control billions of dollars in the palm of their hand from their followers. But you go to the houses of our Maraja and you see how they live. It's not that they cannot afford, sofas, or they can't afford luxuries. But they are looking at it from the fact that they are representative of the religion on a whole. And were our Maraja to drive in fancy cars, live in palatial mansions with waterfalls and all the amenities, people would begin to point a finger at them. And so when they live a humble life, it's because their taqwa makes them live a life of the most simplest of people within their followers. They could do whatever they want, but even when they are given gifts, you'll see this, and you've heard stories like this, when people go to the Maraj and present them with cash gifts for the Marja himself. And I've heard this myself, that the Marja will say that if this is a gift you're giving to me, and I can't give it to anybody else, I refuse that cash gift. Maraja have said this. So when they live a humble life, it's because they realize their status and how people are looking at them, and that they have to be at the most humblest of people within the entire society. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So as we continue on tonight, one of the things that we have to understand, when Imam Ali put this system of governance in place, when he put all of the checks and balances within the system, he made sure that those two groups, the leaders and the followers, that they worked in tandem with one another. And the only time that the system can break, the only time when we have this dichotomy in our system, when we have problems and where we have a breakdown in the way our communities, our societies are being run, is when one of these two groups is not fulfilling their part of the bargain. A leader has rights that he has over the people, and also he has responsibilities to fulfill to the people. When those responsibilities are not fulfilled, when they're not met, when the rights of the people are trampled upon, This is where the problem stems. And you'd see that it would become a problem, and then it would become an issue where now the people would say, well, if I'm not being given my rights, I'll take them by force. I will circumvent the system to get what I think is mine. So those have to be in check. They go in a circular motion. When the leaders are in check, when they're fulfilling their part of the bargain, the people will automatically follow along, and they'll give the leaders the respect that they're due. But when there's a breakdown somewhere, when there's a loss of communication, that's where the problem stems. And we have this saying, this is not a hadith, but it is based on a hadith of Rasulullah, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The saying is this, again, it's based on a hadith, but it's not the words of Rasul. That authority and leadership can survive if it is based on justice, even if it is coupled with kufr, with disbelief. But a system can never endure if it's based on oppression coupled with iman, with faith. Meaning that our systems in the West today, they're not built on Islam or divinely inspired religion. We don't have, a Western government that is even based on the norms of Christianity. It's based on a secular society. But because there has been a level of justice in our societies where, up until, there are a show of, if you're guilty, you go to court, you pay the penalties, you face the fine. Because our systems are built on a system of justice, these non-Muslim systems, they have been allowed to endure. They have been allowed to continue. Because people can deal with non-belief. We can live in an irreligious society. You and I can live as Muslims, practice our faith freely, even here in Canada. But were the tables to be turned and the system would be built on injustice, oppression, rights being taken away, even if it's a Muslim government, that system will crumble. That is a thing that humanity cannot tolerate. We can deal with non-Muslim governments because we have our rights. We know at the end of the day, we can go to the court of law. We can, protest. We can have our, marches and all our slogans. But we know that we'll be dealt with justice. But when justice is thrown out the window, then guess what? That government will cease to exist. And so this is something which we have to keep in mind. And this is, even things that we've seen in the Middle East and other parts of the world, these springs and revolutions, right? And these were countries that revolutions happened in where they had Islam as a system, but they didn't have justice, right? They didn't have true justice. And so revolutions happened and governments were overturned. And it continues to happen because people cannot deal with injustice. That just becomes a fact of life. It's a fact of what Amir al-Mu'mineen stood for, why he was killed. And is also a clear concept which is embodied in the Quran and in the hadith of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me go, before we give the rights and the responsibilities, just a verse of the Quran and a brief hadith. This verse of the Quran comes to us from Surah Nisa, chapter number 4, verse 135. And this is a theme which Allah repeats in the Quran many times. It's not just one or two verses. In this verse, Allah clearly says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you who believe. So He's talking to you and I now. Allah is saying, you who are Muslims, you claim Iman. And if you're Shia, you claim Amir al-Mu'mineen as your Imam. He's Amir al-Mu'mineen. So we have to listen to this verse a bit more carefully. Kunu qawwamina bil qist. Allah says, be strict observers of justice. Be strict observers of justice. Shuhada'a lillahi walau ala anfusikum aw al-walidaini wal akrabin. Be bearers of justice. Let's recite a salawat to move forward, please, before we continue with the rest of the talk. Salu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Amir al-Mu'mineen, one more salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So Allah says, be strict observers of justice, bearers of true evidence for the sake of Allah. Even if being fair and just means you go against your own self. You pass a wrong judgment. Don't be afraid to say, I made a mistake in my life. I'm going to correct that problem. Or bil walidain, your parents or akrabin or your close family members. And Allah adds, in yakun ghaniyan aw faqiran, if they're rich or poor. Allah is showing us that when it comes to justice, even if you have to bear witness against yourself that you were wrong, you have to do that. If it's your family, it shouldn't make a difference. Family members should always be outside of that scope. It doesn't matter how close they are. Your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your own children. If they're wrong, they have to be called out for being wrong. Yes, family ties exist. Family ties should be maintained. We're not talking about breaking the family tie, because that is a major sin in Islam. But Allah says that be bearers of justice. Right? It's all about justice. This is why Allah revealed Quran, why He revealed the divine books. This is why prophets came, so that you and I would implement justice within our lives. And it shouldn't make a difference where or how or who is in front of us. We need to maintain that justice. Let me go to just two traits tonight. There are multiple traits. The scholars have, given forth many traits from the letter that Imam Ali gave to Malik al-Ashtar and the letter to Uthman ibn Hunayf, and other examples of what are the traits of a leader. What are some of the qualities that a leader himself or herself needs to possess? What are the things that are looked for in the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen? Because again, he had that opportunity to govern in a limited time frame, and he's given us points of guidance for us to think about and to implement if we ever make it to a position. One thing that we have is to be fair and just. Just as that verse I mentioned that Allah tells us to be just, this is something that we have to implement within our tenure as a leader of a community. And the second is knowledge. I'm going to look at both of these very briefly with an example first about being fair and just. Now there's a picture on the screen of an iron rod being heated up. And you can imagine if that were to touch your skin, how much that would hurt, right? Probably a couple hundred degrees, if not more. In the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen, when he was the Khalifa, his brother comes to him. The brother is who? Aqil. Aqil, the son of Abu Talib. We know that Imam Ali had 3 brothers, 2 sisters. Aqil comes to Imam Ali. At the time of his caliphate, he knows that his brother Ali is the head of what today would be like 50 different countries. He probably has millions of gold coins in the public treasury. He thought maybe that Imam Ali had a lot of extra money to lend out. And in Najul Balagha, there's a sermon where Imam Ali is talking about what happened between him and Aqil. The story goes like this, that Aqil comes to Imam Ali. And Imam Ali describes the scenario like this, that Aqil came to me. And he was all disheveled. He looked like he was in a mess. And his children, their hair was messy, their clothes were all tattered, their clothes were all ripped up. And Aqil comes to Imam Ali and says, give me a bit of extra from the public treasury. My kids are in a problem, in a bad state, I need to take care of them. But he came to Imam Ali not as the leader and the follower, but you're my brother, help me out a bit, take a bit of money out of the public treasury. But you know how much he was asking for? Najul Balagha mentions this. When Aqil came to Imam Ali, he was asking for 3 kilograms of flour. 3 kilogram bag of flour. Think about that. He wasn't asking for 100,000 coins or $1 million or governorship of a province. He wanted 3 kilograms of flour. But he wanted that not because it was his maybe need as he was on welfare or as social assistance. He went to Imam Ali thinking, well, he's my brother, right? Nepotism. He's a family member. He's going to help me out. And Imam Ali, according to the hadith, he took an iron rod like that. And they say that Aqil, with one report I read that said that Aqil was blind at this time. Imam Ali took the rod and heated it in the fire. And he just brought it near to the skin of Aqil. And Aqil felt the heat begin to sear his hand. And he moves his hand away. And he says to Imam Ali, he says, what are you trying to do to me? You're trying to burn me? Imam Ali turns around and he says, you want me to give you something that's not your right? And you want me to burn in the fire of hell? You can't deal with a bit of hot iron of this dunya, maybe a few hundred degrees, but you want Ali ibn Abi Talib to be thrown into the fire of hell? He says, by God, I could never do that. My justice is too much to be able to give you something that is not your right. If you're coming to me as a person in the community and you need help, we can talk about it. But if you're coming to me as I'm your brother and I'm going to give you a favor from the public treasury, which is the wealth of the entire Muslim community, then he's like, you got to think about that again. You got a second thing coming to you, because I'm not going to break my justice, my intense plan to implement justice just to give you a couple kilograms of flour. It was nothing. And Imam Ali himself said, I don't even have that for my own family. So forget about you and your children, my own family doesn't have that to eat. So Imam Ali shows us the level of justice that he was trying to bring about in a society, that he was so concerned about something which, today people might think so trivial. Oh, it's only a bit of flour. What's the big deal? It's only a loan for a little bit of time. It's my relative. I have to help him out. Yes, you help them out, but not when it comes to breaking the, this issue of justice and having a just and balanced society, as Imam Ali alayhi salam was trying to implement after, as I mentioned, that many years of the caliphate where justice had been thrown out of the window. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me give you an example in the sermon of Imam Ali. Again, this is from the letter to Uthman ibn Hunayf in letter number 45 in Najul Balagha, about his level of fairness and justice. He says that if I wished, I could have taken the way leading towards worldly pleasures, pure honey, fine wheat and silk clothes. But it cannot be that my passions lead me and greed takes me to choosing good meals, while in the Hijaz or Yamama, there may be people who have no hope of getting bread, or who do not have a full meal. Shall I go to sleep with a full stomach, while around me there may be hungry and thirsty people? This is what Imam Ali alayhi salam was concerned about. Again, this is why he was killed in the way he was killed. Because he was thinking about the society. When other khulafa were busy filling the pockets of their family members with gold and silver, and appointing them to government positions where they didn't deserve it, Imam Ali, he could have done what he wanted. He could have had the wealth of the universe by the snap of his fingers. But he realized that, that is not the way that Allah wants a leader to lead. He had to show by example. And he showed by example so that you and I, coming 1400 years later, would realize how important it is to have a community, have a society built upon justice. And ultimately, he paid the price in the mihrab for that level of justice which he showed. The second point I want to mention on behalf of the leadership point of view is about knowledge and information. To be leaders, we have to know. There has to be a level of knowledge. And there has to be a level of humility when we don't know, that we confess that we don't know, and we make our best effort to go and find the details. So in another letter in Najul Balagha, in letter number 53, Imam Ali clearly tells people, he tells actually this is to Malik al-Ashtar, when he sends him to Egypt with that manifesto. How do you deal when you come across situations? You get to Egypt, and Imam Ali is all the way in Basra. There's no internet, there's no fax machine, there's no way to communicate. How do you deal with problems in society when you don't have the Imam with you? You're going to come up with issues. Imam Ali recognized that fact. And so he tells Malik, he says that increase your association and involvement with the religious discussions of the scholars and deliberations of the wise in ascertaining what is right. Talk to people when you don't know something. Right? This is something that is in the Quran, that Allah talks about. Allah tells us, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلِ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask people who know if you don't know. Right? Nobody in this room knows everything. Right? Nobody on this earth knows everything. As Allah tells us, فَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي إِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. Above everybody who has knowledge is somebody who has more knowledge. Nobody on earth today can claim to know everything. Even the Prophet and our Imams, they cannot claim to know everything. Yes, they have ilmul ghaib, but their ilmul ghaib is dependent on what Allah wants them to know. Their knowledge is still limited. Rasulullah does not know everything. And for us to assume that, it is to go to ghulu, to extremism. Prophet doesn't know everything, but he can know if Allah gives him that knowledge. The Imam of our time doesn't know everything, but if he needs to know, Allah can give him that knowledge. The point is that for leadership to be effective, they have to realize their limits when they don't know something. To give you a very practical example, I've been in the presence of Maraja Taqleed, of grand marjas who are 80, 90 years old, who have studied for 70 years of their life. And I remember one time in the gathering, and there was 20, 30 other ulama, mujtahids, major scholars in the presence of this one marja. And one of the scholars asked the marja, "What is your fatwa on this and this ruling?" He asked a specific question. And the marja says, "I don't know." Now he's the marja, he issued the fatwa, he says, "I don't know." The mujtahid or the scholars around him began to laugh. They said, "Aha, you're the marja, you don't know?" And you know what the marja says? He goes, "I don't memorize my own risala. I don't memorize every fatwa I gave. But I can open my book and find what ruling I gave and give you the proof of why I gave this ruling." I give this example to show us that even the greatest of our scholars, they're not embarrassed to say, "I don't know." And this is one of the prime things that even when students go to the hawza, they're taught. And it's based on a hadith from the Ahlul Bayt, that whoever gives up saying, "I don't know," they've sealed their own destruction. Because nobody can know everything about everything. It's impossible. Right? If a marja taqleed would not remember his own fatwa, and he goes and refers to a book he wrote, then who are you and I? Right? We are not expected to know everything. I don't know everything about every aspect of religion, but I know that if I don't know something, I can say I don't know, and I can tell you I can go and find the answer. And so we have to realize that knowledge should be like this, that we have to have humility to say, "I don't know," and I will get an answer to you, and I'll get an answer for you. This is what Imam Ali was showing Malik al-Ashtar, that associate with the ulama, with the religious scholars in Egypt when you have problems, and associate with the wise people of the society, the researchers, the academics of the society at his time. Because you might come across a problem in Egypt that you can't solve. You don't know about, everything there is to know. So go to the people who know, ask them the question, and you will get an answer from them. And so Imam Ali put this forth. And again, there are many criteria for leadership. These are just two of them that we want to share tonight. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. On the other side of the spectrum are us, the followers. What is our responsibility? As I mentioned, that it's that reciprocal, it goes in a circle. The leaders have responsibilities, and we have to fulfill those. They have rights over us. And as the hadith says, that the leaders have rights over the followers, and the followers have rights over the leaders. What about us as the followers? What do we have to do? Do we just do whatever we want to do, or is there a plan that Islam had laid down? There are, again, just 2 points I want to mention tonight, and then we'll close this majlis for this evening. One is about showing care and concern for our leaders, being concerned about them. And I'll base this on a hadith. And also compliance, following what they ask us to do. Obviously within the confines, within the limits of the religion. We're not talking about if a leader were to ask you to do something against the rules of God. Obviously that means you don't follow them. But within the confines of religion, what do we do when we're asked to do something? The first one is about care and concern. And as this hadith says, and this is from Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In which he says that the Muslim is the mirror image for his or her fellow Muslim. So then if you see some error in your fellow believer, do not go forth in groups to attack that person. Rather, work to guide them and properly advise them and be mellow with that person. That's just something to think about when we look and analyze our lives. Not our lives in this room, but our lives as human beings, as Muslims. When a person makes a mistake and they're at a leadership position, what's the first thing we do? Do we go to them and say, do we take them aside or call them up and say, you said something or you did something a bit, I have a concern with it. Can you explain why you did it? No, most of the times if you're on social media, the tweets start, the Facebook messages start, this person did this, he said that, she said that, they did this. But the hadith says we are mirror images of one another. If I am, looking at this hadith, when I get ready and dressed up in the morning to go to school or go to work, and I look in the mirror and I see a blemish on my face, I'm not going to slap myself in the face, right? I'm going to fix myself in a proper way. I'm going to make sure that I correct myself in the private, right? But the hadith tells us that when we deal with one another, that we have to do the same thing. And again, it's something to think about, that how do I deal with people at a leadership position? Do I go around spreading rumors that this person said this, they did that, she did this, he said that, she said that? And rather than going to speak to that person and asking them, as the Imam Ali says, if you see an error, don't go forth to attack the person, work to guide them and properly advise them and be mellow with that person. Right? Maybe they made an honest mistake, we don't know. Maybe they did what they thought was right. Rather than insult the person and drag their name through the mud in the community and start phoning people up and saying things about the person that now you have to later regret, we have to take the way of Amir al-Mu'mineen is be concerned for one another. Have that care and concern that we don't want to tarnish the image of another fellow believer. Right? It's such a logical thing, but unfortunately when we get caught up in this world that we live in, we tend to forget such common rational ways to deal with problems and situations. And especially because now social media is open to everybody, we just go on that bandwagon and say things that we later on maybe have to regret. But Imam Ali shows us that be concerned, but do it in the proper way. Take the person aside, call them up at home, go and meet them privately, guide them and explain to them in a proper way. The final point, and we'll close with this part, is compliance. That one of the rights of the leaders over us, the followers, is that we follow what they ask us to do. And again, this is just a portion of the khutbah of Amir al-Mu'mineen. But he told his followers that when it comes to my leadership, when it comes to me guiding and governing over society, he says, extend to me support, which is free from deceit and pure from doubt. We're not talking about following a corrupt individual. Nobody would do that. But when it comes to leadership within a community, within a society, and again I go back to that point when we're working together to create a community that is preparing for the return of our 12th Imam. He's looking for certain qualities and criteria within us. And one is that we follow the commands of a leadership. Otherwise, what is the point of having leaders when we don't want to follow them? Leader says walk to the left, we walk to the right. He says do this, we do that. She says act in this way, we do the complete opposite. Why? If we're all working as a community, if we're all working as Shias of lovers of Ali Muhammad, and we're all working towards the one goal which should be at the forefront of our mind, which is the return of our 12th Imam, then we should all be walking together. We should all be in a form of communication and dialogues that we move together in one way. Not that one foot is going this way and the other is going the other way. No, this isn't what the Imams brought from the Ahlul Bayt. This is not what Amir al-Mu'mineen gave his life for in Masjid al-Kufa. For us to be, again, not us in this community, but us as a global ummah, to be divergent and going in different paths. When we all have the same Prophet, the same Ahlul Bayt, the same Imam that we follow, when we all have the same title of the Shia of Ali, that we have to realize that we're all in this together. And if we truly want to build what we recite in dua, in this du'as in month of Ramadan every night, where we say, Allahumma inna narghabu ilayka fi dawlatin karima. If we're really looking for this noble society, this just government, this perfect utopia where everybody is taken care of, then that will only come about when we as individuals return back to the teachings of Ali Muhammad, where we look towards the teachings of Imam Ali and the family of Ali, when we look to them and see what it is that they left for us as a legacy, and when we do that, and it will be difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy to follow their teachings, because it's hard. To follow Imam Ali alayhi salam, as I mentioned 2 nights ago, is not an easy thing. To be just in your life with your family is not easy. To deprive yourself your rights because of the fact that you want to build a just society is not an easy thing. But I'm sure if we, as a global ummah, can learn from the teachings of Amir al-Mu'mineen, if we can open up Nahjul Balagha and read about how he brought forth, or he tried to bring about a revolution in the minds of the people, that we will see the merit and the worth in the teachings of Amir al-Mu'mineen. And that if we walk down that path, that we will be able to bring about a system where we have the closest, maybe, representation of what the 12th Imam would be able to complete for us. But until that time, we obviously have a long way to go, and we have a long uphill battle to go through. And as we close, we remember this evening the actual death of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and what was happening to the family and to the companions who were suffering in these days in the month of Ramadan. We take ourselves back to the city of Kufa, and this is the 40th year after the Hijrah. As we mentioned 2 nights ago, on the 19th of Ramadan, a night which should have been a night of blessing and barakah, where we were gathering for amal of remembering Allah and remembering the night of Qadr. Amir al-Mu'mineen on that night, as we recall, that he had left the house of his daughter Kulthum. He had iftar with his daughter, and he had made his way to Masjid al-Kufa to lead the Fajr prayers. We recall that as he was in his first rakat, and he stood up and he stands up to complete that first rakat, that the curse ibn Muljim with that poisoned sword. Historians mention, brothers and sisters, that the sword that ibn Muljim, the Mal'un, had, that he bought the sword for 1,000 dinar. And he spent 1,000 dinar on poison just to cover this sword in the poison. That when the Imam Ali had got up from the state of sajda on that morning prayer, that the curse ibn Muljim strikes Amir al-Mu'mineen on the head. As Imam Ali is bleeding in the mihrab, we're told that Imam Hassan and Hussein run towards his side. Imam Ali cannot begin the prayer, so Imam Hassan leads the Jamaat in the Fajr prayer. As Imam Ali is finished, as the namaz finishes, Imam Ali is sitting in the mihrab with blood draining down from his head. Just as Rasulullah had told Imam Ali that on this day your face would be drenched in your blood, your beard would be drenched in your own blood. As Imam Ali is sitting in the mihrab and the blood is pouring down from his forehead, Imam Hassan and Hussein come to either side of the Imam. We're told at this point there was so much confusion in Kufa. People are hearing that Imam Ali has been struck on the head with a sword. People run to the Masjid of Kufa. At the same time, the curse ibn Muljim has been caught somewhere in the streets of Kufa. He's brought to the Imam as he's being paraded through the Masjid of Kufa. Historians mention in the books, Shaykh Abbas Qumi mentions in his book Muntal A'mal, that as the cursed Ibn Muljim is being led through the Masjid of Kufa, people are spitting at Ibn Muljim. They're hitting him in the face. They're hitting him all over the body. Eventually he's brought in front of Imam Ali. Imam Ali, although he's been bleeding for the last few moments, he looks at the cursed Ibn Muljim. The first thing that Imam Ali says to him is, he says, was I such a bad Imam to you? Was I such a bad leader to you? Keep in mind, this Ibn Muljim was the same man who fought with Imam Ali in 3 battles. Imam Ali says, I gave you respect in the battle. I gave you respect. I gave you dignity. I treated you with compassion and with mercy. And this is how you treat your Imam. At this point, we're told that after a brief discussion, Ibn Muljim, he's looking disturbed. He's looking perplexed. Imam Ali is taken to his home. This is on the 19th of the month of Ramadan. We're told that as he's been brought into his house, Bibi Zainab and Kulthum are brought into the house. They see their father in the state that he's in. They're told that as the poison is beginning to grow through his body, the color of his skin is beginning to change. As Imam Ali is sitting in his bed on the 19th of the month of Ramadan, he begins to mention that famous sentence where he says, Saluni, Saluni, qabla an tafqiduni. He says, come and ask me any question you have before I leave this world. We're told that as the days progressed, as the day of the 19th progressed, as the 20th progressed, that people would come to the door of the house of Imam Ali. People would come and ask questions from Imam Ali. He would give them the answers and then they would leave. People would come and just sit at the house of Imam Ali and begin to recite poetry and beat their chest out of what has happened to Imam Ali. Eventually, brothers and sisters, the night of the 21st of Ramadan comes along. The night of the 21st comes and Imam Ali realizes that this is now the last part of his life. He calls Imam Hassan near to him. He passes over the imamate to Imam Hassan. He gives him the treasures of imamate. He gives Imam Hassan some advice. He says, "Oh my son Hassan," he says, "I'm going to leave this world." He says that if I leave this world and I die, you have the right to take the penalty of death on Ibn Muljim. If I live another day, I will decide what to do with him. But he says that if I die, you give my body the ghusl. You give my body the hunut. Use the hunut that was given by Jibreel for Rasulullah. And use the kafan that had come to us from Rasulullah. Eventually, brothers and sisters, Imam Ali leaves this world. In the presence of all his family members, his soul goes back to Allah. As he's about to leave this world, he tells his children, he says, "I see Rasulullah in front of me. He's calling me back. I see Lady Khadija, she's calling me back. I see my wife, dear Zahra, she's calling me back to her." As he leaves this world, Imam Hassan begins to grieve, and the family begin to lament. As the night progresses on, they begin to give the ghusl to their father. Imam Hassan and Hussein are giving the ghusl to their father. They apply the hunut. They begin to wrap the body of their father in the kafan. And just as Imam Ali had told his sons, he said that when you put me in the coffin, do not carry the coffin from the front, just hold it by the back. And what happens in this part, brothers and sisters, is that the angels, Jibreel and Mikael, they come from the heavens. They began to hold the coffin of Imam Ali from the front, and they began to walk from the city of Kufa towards the city of Najaf. They go towards Najaf, and all of a sudden the coffin begins to be put down on the ground. They begin to dig a grave in the ground. And as they begin to dig, they realize that just like Imam Ali told them, that his brother Prophet Nuh had dug the grave for him many thousand years ago. They open the grave and they see a plaque written by Prophet Nuh that, "Oh Ali, this is your grave that we have made ready for you." They place the grave, they do the namaz amayat over their father. They place Imam Ali in the qabr and they close the grave up. But I end with this one last point, that just as Bibi Fatima alayhi salam, just as when she had left this world, that Imam Ali had to dig many graves to keep her death a secret and to keep her burial spot a secret, Imam Ali had faced the same fate. And so he told his son Hassan that make 4 or 5 graves around the city of Kufa and in Najaf and towards Medina. Do not let people know where I have been buried, because I fear that the Khawarij will come and they will take my body from my grave and they will desecrate my body and that they will destroy my body. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ.